Hi, my name is Kinsey Self. I am an integrative nutritionist and owner of Progressive Health and Wellness. And one of my core beliefs is that education is power. So, in light of everything that's been going on recently, and also with the fact that many stealth viral infections are actually at the root of many of my clients' chronic, long standing health concerns, I wanted to come out with an educational series to explain all things virus. So, what a virus is, which is where we're going to start in today's talk, what a virus is and how it works, how it affects our body. Then we'll get into various aspects of the immune system, such as factors that can make you more susceptible to viral infections and less efficient at eradicating viral infections. And then we'll also talk about, and what I should clarify, when I say that, I mean pre-existing conditions. Then we'll have another video that looks into some testing that you can do to identify if you might be actually at risk and not aware of it. And then we'll get into some nutritional and lifestyle factors that you can do to strengthen your immune system from a long-term perspective, but then also to make your body more resilient and effective at eradicating a virus. Okay, so first things first, what is a virus? For many of us, a viral infection and a bacterial infection often feel the same, but a virus is very, very different from a bacteria. So a virus actually lies on the edge of what we would even consider life, biologically speaking. The reason for that is because a virus is very simple in its structure. It's simply genetic material, DNA or RNA, wrapped in a protein coat, a protective protein coat, and then some types of viruses are also wrapped in a lipid bilayer, a fatty bilayer. These viruses don't have the ability to reproduce or metabolize or influence, respond to their environment on their own. Those are three traits that are necessary to even be considered life. So for that reason, we don't actually consider them life, biologically speaking. However, this kind of gets confused because once you see how they behave, they're quite intelligent from an evolutionary perspective. So they kind of bridge that line on life, not life. Nonetheless, viruses are also microscopic. So they're about 1,000th the size of a bacterial cell. Bacterial cells are often even smaller than human cells. So truly, they're microscopic. We can only see them with an electron microscope. We can't even see them with a normal light microscope. Okay. Secondly, viruses, they're basically dormant. They're inert unless they live in a host, unless they find a host. So viruses can quote, live dormant in the environment, waiting for a susceptible host to come along, and then it enters the body, and this could be human, it could be plant, it could be animal. It enters the host and then finds an appropriate cell to infect. And this is where the cascade of events begins. So when I say an appropriate cell, what I mean by that is viruses express different receptors on their external membranes, on their external, sometimes protein coat or this fatty lipid membrane. And those receptors, you can think of them as a lock and key. So they are able to bind to, we'll use humans as an example, human cells. They're able to bind to specific types of receptors, just like keys can only fit in certain locks. Certain viruses can only bind to certain kinds of receptors in the human, which dictates the symptoms and the disease that manifests, right? So that's why some viruses cause, the common cold, sinus infections. Some viruses cause gastrointestinal symptoms. Some viruses cause muscle aches. Some cause fevers. So that's the reason for that is because it depends on what cell membrane they're binding to, what type of tissue they're binding to. So once they bind, two things can happen depending on the kind of virus. One is we get an acute infection. So when we see COVID, I'm going to go down that alley in just a minute and talk about exactly what happens with the COVID-19 infection. But one type of response is we get the acute infection. So what happens is the virus binds to our cell and it injects into the cell like I said before, viruses cannot reproduce on their own. They don't have the enzymes and the cellular machinery to do so. So they hijack our cells. They inject themselves into our cells, use our enzymes and genetic material and cellular material to replicate rapidly within our cells, create more viruses. That's exactly how COVID works. Create more viruses and then escape out of our cells and flourish, right? They go, and now there's thousands of viral DNA, viral cells that can go and repeat that same process. So they'll escape the one cell, the original host cell, bind to other cell membranes, infect them, replicate, and then escape, and so on. So in the case of COVID-19, what's happening is we are exposed to the virus, to the coronavirus, which is a novel virus. There's actually a whole family of coronaviruses. This is what caused SARS. Coronaviruses are what caused MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. So we've seen this before, but this is slightly different. So nonetheless, we are exposed to the virus. This can happen through breathing. In the case of COVID, it happens through breathing or particles. In other viruses, it's direct contact with fluids, etc. But with COVID, we inhale it, and it binds to a receptor in our lungs called the ACE receptor. When it binds to the ACE receptor, that whole chain of events, which is called the lytic chain of events, occurs. So it injects into a cell, multiplies rapidly, escapes the cell, binds to other lung tissue, lung receptors, and continues that process almost basically uncontrollably. Okay. So as this is happening, our immune system with this kind of virus, our immune system is capable of killing this kind of virus. And we do that through a couple different mechanisms. I don't want to get too techy here, but we rely heavily on what are called T cells. T cells are it's part of our innate immune system, meaning we're born with it. T cells, when they see this virus, they launch a chemical attack that begins the process of being able to kill the virus. Now, granted, that takes time, which is why we're infected, right? And we get the symptoms and we get the diagnosable condition itself. Until in this type of viral infection, the T cells can take over and use their cytotoxic chemicals to kill the virus, and then we eliminate it. It's worth mentioning, we do have the capability, this is how vaccines work, we do have the capability for when the viral proteins first enter our body, if we've been exposed to them before, we can rely on what are called antibodies, part of our humoral immune system. That's the part that has memory, cellular memory, but we have to have been exposed to it before. So once we've been exposed to it before, then we can use antibodies, which are much more efficient, and we can get rid of the virus much quicker. So this is how flu vaccines work. We're exposed to a small amount of the virus, we're able to form antibodies, and then the next time we're exposed to the actual virus, then we have a much faster and efficient immune response, and we don't actually get sick. Okay. Second form of viral infection, similar but different. So some viral infections, acute viral infections, like I just described, we can get rid of them. We rely on the T cells, sometimes the B cells, but we can actually get rid of the virus. Other forms of viral infections, we can't. So this is where we think of herpes, for example, HIV, the chicken pox, right? We can't. So what happens here is the virus, same thing, binds to one of our cells, injects its DNA, but instead of replicating immediately and then escaping the cell, it injects its DNA into our own genetic material. And it can actually lie dormant for years sometimes. Nonetheless, it injects its DNA, it's technically RNA, into our genetic material, lies dormant, and then when there's some kind of an environmental trigger, it could be a large stressor, that suppresses our immune system, whatever it might be, there's some kind of a trigger that allows then our DNA, our cellular DNA, to begin replicating the viral genome. And so then our cells start replicating the virus instead of themselves, and replicating uncontrollably. Now, here's the key. All of this is happening within our own cells. So our immune system doesn't recognize it as a problem. It can't see the infection. So this is a big part of the reason why these kinds of stealth viral infections, different from COVID, different from flu, different from acute, but some of these stealth viral infections become low-grade sources of chronic inflammation. Okay, so in those cases, the best that we can do is support our immune system to keep those expressions at bay so that the virus doesn't continue to express itself. Okay, so it's worth mentioning, because this is where we're going to go into with our next talk. When I say support the immune system, I mean that in two different ways. One is by not giving the immune system anything else to stress it. So not having a heavy burden of different insults that the immune system is constantly having to mitigate. So to give you an analogy, if there's one house on a street that's on fire, the fire department can come in, resolve that pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, right? If the entire block is on fire, that's going to take a lot more troops, a lot more time to rally the troops. There's going to be a lot more damage that occurs in the meantime, and a lot more, a lot of other issues arise. So same kind of concept. So we want to, when we're, when health professionals are always saying, keep your body strong, we're talking about that. So looking at comorbidities. For example, in the case of COVID, some things that increase the ACE receptors that we know of at this point. Smoking. Cigarettes are the worst, but basically smoking anything will increase the number of receptors. Anti-inflammatories, specifically NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, those will also increase receptor expression. So keep in mind, especially anybody listening that might have symptoms of like achiness, muscle aches, fever, and you want to go pop a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, it could make things worse. So don't. Use a different kind of painkiller mitigator instead. Okay. And then the third, for COVID specifically, and then I'll get to these other factors, but the third is those ACE receptors. Certain blood pressure medications called ACE inhibitors can also act on those ACE receptors and increase the receptors. Now, this is not to say to stop taking your blood pressure medication. It's not what I'm saying by any means. But for those of you listening that have thought about quitting smoking, that have thought about wanting to get off of your blood pressure medication and address the reasons why of the hypertension in the first place, now would be a really good time to look into that. So things like exercise, looking at diet, many other factors can be used to address that and to support quitting smoking at the same time. But nonetheless, we can see where some of these lifestyle conditions can contribute to the susceptibility of COVID specifically. Now, with other chronic viral infections, looking at other factors that can, quote, distract the immune system and therefore make it less effective at keeping those viral expressions at bay. So we look at things like dysglycemia, prediabetes, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune condition, immunodeficient states, which, by the way, can be functional, meaning it's just low white blood cells that we're looking for on lab work. Digestive disorders, insomnia, mood disorders like depression. So there's a lot of different things that we can look at to determine your susceptibility to a chronic viral infection, and then also, are there other things that we can address directly to help keep the chronic viral expression at bay? And with COVID, can we do things to strengthen the T cells, to strengthen the immune system and your lung tissue to help, and overall health, to make you less susceptible to the infection in the first place? Okay, so take the stress off the immune system. First way of strengthening it. Second, give it the raw materials. Give the immune system the raw materials it needs to do its job. So here I'm talking about vitamins, minerals, zinc, vitamin C, right? Vitamin A, vitamin K, looking at these different minerals and vitamins, probiotics, gut health to help the immune system with the raw materials it needs. The third, we can use herbal nutrients to facilitate the immune response and in some cases actually help kill or eradicate viruses or bacterial infections in the first place. Okay. And speaking of viruses, bacteria, the one thing I want to mention is bacteria, viruses, different. Antibiotics do not work against viruses because they're completely different machinery. Okay. So, as I mentioned, as a review, we just went through the two different kinds of pathways that viruses can infect us. We talked about acute viral infections versus chronic viral infections, where COVID-19 fits into this process, and what types of immune responses we have, and how we can strengthen our immune system, the three different ways that we can strengthen our immune system. In our next talk, we're going to talk about what some of those predisposing factors are, how we can help determine if that might be at play for you. You might be more susceptible to a more serious acute viral infection or contracting the viral infection in the first place, or a chronic issue. And then, so that'll be video number 2. Video number 3 will go into nutrients to support those specific branches of the immune system to help address an acute viral infection faster and keep a chronic viral infection at bay. Okay. Hope this was helpful. If any questions come up, please do not hesitate to reach out. I am available through Facebook Messenger, through Instagram Messenger. So don't hesitate to reach out. Hope to talk to you soon. Thanks so much. Bye.